Okay, we're going to take a look at Chapter 22 first, which is our Introduction to Cost Structures. We have to understand that in economics, there are different types of costs. Opportunity cost we talked about earlier. It's when you give up the best option you give up by taking a particular course of action. In economics, we are going to talk about explicit costs, costs that you actually pay, and implicit costs, the opportunity costs of doing business. So as we talked about on our ATC, if you remember, that includes our explicit costs, the costs that we actually have to pay for our fixed and variable costs, but also our implicit costs, our opportunity costs, including a normal rate of return. Okay, so here we have our economic costs. Normal profit, we have to earn a normal rate of return. And if you go down below, you see that an economic profit equals total revenue minus opportunity costs of all inputs, including all expenses. So therefore, an economic profit is when you earn over and above all the costs that you outlay, your explicit cost, and cover your implicit costs as well. All right, here we have economic costs. Profits to an economist. Economic profit. Economic profit is only gained when you cover your explicit and implicit costs. Notice how the accounting profit is much higher than the economic profit. That's because the accountants don't take into account implicit costs, normal rate of return and opportunity costs being covered. You have the short run and long run, of course. Really, in accounting, the short run is just based on annual chronology. When does the fiscal year end and when does it begin? In economics, the short run, you'll have different definitions as you cross different things in different books. The main ideas in economics is that your capacity size is fixed. The size of your company, your physical output, your plant size cannot be expanded in the short run. In the long run, you can have a company any size you want. You may encounter other definitions, but this is the main one, that you have a fixed plant capacity size in the short run. Okay, here's the fun stuff. Short run production relationships. We did a little simulation with this. Total product is just simply the total produced. Marginal product is the change in total output over the change in labor. In other words, if you see that labor output there, if you put 1 on the bottom and figure we're hiring 1 additional worker, it's the change in total product from hiring 1 additional employee. Average product, take all the workers, okay, on the bottom, total product on top, and you get the average output per employee. Okay, here are short run production relationships. Remember diminishing returns. We hire more workers. At first, the output per worker increases. That gives us increasing return, causing the marginal to rise rapidly and the average to rise. You can see that in the yellow area. Next, we hit a space where we have diminishing marginal returns. And remember, this means that per worker output is falling, but it's still positive. So our total product is rising, our marginal is falling, and it's causing as long as it's above the average, so the average still rises. Once that marginal crosses the average, as you can see, the average will fall as well. We hit negative returns. Negative returns is where the marginal crosses the x-axis and becomes negative, and it's where the total product begins to fall. Okay, these are the cost structures you need to remember. Fixed costs, total fixed costs. Fixed costs are things like your rent, your property taxes, your property insurance premium, and then the average fixed cost is just taking those fixed costs and dividing it by quantity to get a per unit average fixed cost. Variable costs, things like wages, things like raw materials. In other words, they increase as you produce more. You don't pay them if you have an output of 0. Average variable cost is total variable cost over quantity. Your short run production costs, total fixed and variable costs. You take your total and your variable, add them together, divide by quantity, and you get your average total cost. That's that ATC curve that's so important to us. Marginal cost, that is really the change of producing the next item. the change in cost for producing the next item. So it's the change in total cost over the change in quantity. And remember, total cost is only the change in variable cost because our fixed cost doesn't change. Here are the equations laid out for you. Total fixed cost, total variable cost, average fixed cost, average variable cost, average total cost, and marginal cost. Know them! And here are the graphs of our cost structures. Total cost and total fixed cost differ by the fixed cost, as you can see there, and they increase quickly, slowly, and then rise more rapidly because of diminishing marginal negative returns. The total fixed cost stays constant as it doesn't change with output. Important cost structures. First, we have marginal cost. Notice how important marginal cost is in what we've been doing with our monopoly and oligopoly and perfect competition structures. The cost of producing additional item, one additional item. The cost falls and then rises. The bottom of that curve is where diminishing returns set in. So as my per worker output falls, the per unit cost starts to rise. When the ATC and AVC are crossed by marginal, they both rise as well. AFC, average fixed cost, declines towards the x-axis. As we produce more, the average fixed cost per item goes down. You can see that the marginal product and average product are derivatives of the marginal cost and average variable cost. As the marginal cost starts to rise, the marginal product starts to fall. The apex of the marginal product curve is the nadir of the marginal cost curve. The same thing happens with the APC and AP. Don't forget, in the long run, we talked about economies of scale. Long run production costs. For every plant capacity size, there's a short run ATC curve. All capacities can be plotted as such. You can kind of see it here where they've started to plot these ATC curves. I'm going to go down a little bit to when this is fully drawn out, and we can take a look at the economies of scale. Curve. Our long run ATC curve just shows us that continuum of possible smaller plant sizes we could have had and all the different least cost production points on that plant. Notice that as our output increases, initially our per unit cost falls. Remember, that's called an economy of scale. Getting bigger means cheaper initially, and then eventually our costs will start to rise again. Economies of scale. Why does this happen? Lots of things. Other efficient capital, specialization, and just getting bigger. Companies can produce things at lower per unit costs. It just seems logical and consistent. Henry Ford could make Model Ts much cheaper than somebody trying to make them by hand. So here's the first range on our long run average total cost curve, the economies of scale. As our output increases, our per unit cost begins to fall. We're getting bigger and we're getting cheaper per unit outcomes. We have a rather large constant returns to scale. Over this range, output doesn't change per unit cost, and this makes sense. If a large company, if Campbell's can produce 1 million cans of soup at 20 cents a can, they could probably produce 1,100,000 or 900,000 about the same price. That makes sense. Eventually, we hit diseconomies of scale. The company gets too large and the costs start to rise again. This is our long-run ATC curve shifting up, not shifting up, turning and increasing as the per unit costs begin to rise with output. Minimum efficient scale and natural monopoly a little bit down the road. It is kind of important to understand that in some companies, the only company that's efficient is one single monopoly. Those are our cost structures. Know the graphs, know why they have the shape that they do. Make sure you're able to reproduce them from memory.